Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to HCA DBHR presentation on foundational community supports and our startup services for our substance use disorder programming. It'll be just a couple more minutes. I can see attendees are checking in as we speak, so welcome again, and I'll be back in just a couple minutes.
A bummer.
Good afternoon, and welcome to HCA DBHR's presentation. This presentation will be on programming and documentation, as all the agencies are preparing to contract with the Mayor Group for foundational community supports. We still have people checking in, so let's just get a couple more minutes and we'll get this presentation going. Thank you. Well, it looks like we have 24 attendees at this point. I'm sure there'll be some people signing on as we move on through the process, but we can go ahead and get started for everybody that's here and ready to go. My colleagues and I, this is Lisa Bennett-Perry with the Healthcare Authority. I'm the Supportive Employment Supportive Housing Administrator. My colleague Darren's on the phone as well. Darren?
Hi, this is Darren Paschke. I'm the Supportive Employment Program Manager for Western Washington with the Healthcare Authority. Hi, everybody.
I'm not too sure. Darren or Dawn, are you on the phone?
I am. This is Dawn Miller. I'm the Supported Employment Program Manager and Trainer for the east side of the state.
Great. So everybody's here. So we're off to a good start. We still have a couple people checking in, and just a little bit of housekeeping. We will have everybody muted during the presentation, but if you have any questions, please just type them in to the chat box, or you can raise your hand. We'd be happy to unmute you. The more questions, the more rich our experience will be. So please don't hesitate to ask us questions along the way. The goal for today is to take a deeper dive into fidelity. Darren will be covering career profile and documentation. We briefly went over career profile in one of our trainings, but Darren's going to take, like I said, a deeper dive into that subject. Dawn will be next, and she will be covering the Medicaid documentation. As you all know, these services through a contract through AmeriGroup will be Medicaid services, fee-for-service contracts, and which means that you have to be able to document what your services are and how to tie that back to medical necessity. So Dawn is going to do that, and plus we have a whole bunch of resources that I'm sure she'll be able to share with you to refer back to after this training as well. I myself will also touch on some extended fidelity and basically kind of give you better examples of what the actual recipe to reach high fidelity is. So I'm going to touch on some items as well. I do want to recognize that we have a very diverse group of agencies on this call, and you will hear through IPS, and I've said this before, mental health throughout the I don't know, when we pull up the fidelity, help me, the fidelity sheet. Yeah, the fidelity scale. It's going to say mental health throughout there. Please just replace it with, if you're a peer-run organization and not a behavioral health agency, or if you're, working a tribal agency, but you're not a behavioral health agency, just, our substance use disorder treatment center, just to make sure that, although we can't replace it because of course we can't rewrite fidelity, but we as Washington State recognize all of these different type of agencies as pertinent to the services that we provide, and so we recognize it that way. I wanted to just put up just a quick note out to there to whomever's responsible for invoicing for your agency, that after you complete each deliverable, and in this case, it could be each training, you're able to bill us for these trainings. The contract included that you complete each one of these trainings, that you completed a contract with AmeriGroup, that you hire an employment specialist. All of these are different payment points. So please invoice for anything you've completed up to this point. It would be greatly appreciated. So it will be either Darren or Dawn, depending on who your contract manager is. If you're not sure, please ask us. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and how about a roll call? Let's see where we're at here. If you want to go ahead and just put your agency and your position in the question box, then that would be a great way for us to kind of gather who all's here. And yes, we will share our screen. We will share as soon as I have something to share. Hello, Peninsula. I see there's Peninsula on there so far. Looks like we have Lifeline, Yakima Neighborhood Health, Open Login, Helping Professionals, Icron, Integrated Health, Pioneer Human Services. And I'm sure I'm missing somebody. Welcome, everybody. So Darren, are you ready to start your presentation?
Yeah, let me see if we can do this. Do you have to change presentation over to me?
Let me go here. I haven't started mine.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go here. Make sure.
Oh.
Give that up, Darren. I think I shifted it over to you. Oddly enough, and I don't know if everybody can see it, but we show up as staff, and it says, go to 100B organizer, presenter, organizer, and organizer me. So your guess is as good as mine as far as which one Darren might be. So give it a try, Darren. I think I switched it over to you.
Okay.
There we go. And I'll keep track of the chat box. So as we go along, if there are questions, please feel free to type them in, and I'll make sure to let Darren know when there are questions.
So is the IPS Supportive Employment Educational Career Profile face sheet showing?
It is.
Oh,
At least
okay.
for me.
Well, you're number one on my list, Dawn. So that's a good
Oh.
start.
And I see a yes from Debbie. So we're all on your list, and it's working.
Thank you. Yes, all 30 of you are number one on my list today. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for suffering through the sidebar talk. Dawn and I, we kind of do that a lot during our presentations. I do want to thank you all for attending today. Laughter is the best medicine, after all, is our strategy. And I just wanted to thank you all for joining today. I know things have been dire for many families, friends, and loved ones during the fires and the dense smoke and fog that we are dealing with today. So definitely breathing has been a little bit hard for me, so I apologize ahead of time if I need to take a break to hydrate or take a pause to cough. So I do apologize that from the get-go. As Lisa said, this is a very behavioral health focused document. I know that's not going to fit into everybody's organizational structure, but again, this is also the client's, job seeker's perspective to work around. So even though you'll see the behavioral health, the mental health, some of those things that come up, I think it's still important to get the client's perspective as we dive into this. So what is a career profile? It's an information gathering process. This document can be a tool. It's an active tool to learn about the person, learn about the job seeker, and let the job seeker share their story. This is really the first stage of building blocks and building trust, attempting to use as many open-ended questions as we can to guide us through this platform. Try to avoid the short yes or no questions. I know those will come up during interviews, but hopefully we can focus more on the open-ended questions and get that dialogue started with the candidate. And this is just a word of caution. This is not a race to get through all 14 pages in 15 minutes or less. This is a document and a tool, like I said, to build a foundation to engage and learn more about the client. From our perspective, being a fidelity reviewer, it's really important that and job seeker through each document. but it really waters down the relationship building process, getting this done. We don't want to lose any critical information or find out some important information about the job seeker. We really want to focus on building the relationship, which is going to take some time, investment, and quite a bit of active listening to get the process going. This is a dynamic process. It's okay to update. It's okay to make changes to the document. A quality profile reflects the interests of the individual job seeker and some of the next steps that we're going to look at to get closer to the employment goal. Goal number 1 is the career profile is a reflection of the job seeker. This is my piece. Goal number 2, it also allows other staff or maybe another employment specialist coming into the program or new staff coming in to know more about the client without going through another series of 14 pages to get some baseline information. You know, our goal is to build a roadmap to aid in problem solving and hopefully reduce potential barriers as we get closer to employment. Moving into the work goal, a real important question that stands at the very top is the dream job. What kind of elements are really important to the candidate? Is it happiness? Could it be aspirations? Maybe hope? Finances? Coworkers? Maybe they're very mission-centric and they want to give back to the community. Maybe they're looking for a change in opportunity or a change in work status. Or maybe promotion, improved satisfaction, work setting, maybe something else we haven't even thought about that the job seeker has a goal or something they want to go in. But just taking some time and doing some active listening and encouraging the job seeker to really share about what some of their likes or dislikes are. Hopefully in this initial process, we're going to learn at least 3 new things about the job seeker that's going to be very important, building foundation to do job development later. One thing I like to do is ask the job seeker, do they know anyone who's working now? Is that person doing anything that they may like, or maybe something that they don't like? Just trying to kind of get the boundaries of the development process to see where the client is at. It's also very important to know what the job seeker doesn't want to do. Sometimes they might really be really clear, I don't want to do dishes, I don't want to do custodial, before we get to something that they feel more robust and positive about. I think it's also important to find out about what really makes people nervous about going back to work. A lot of people will say nothing. Being a job developer myself, sometimes it takes a couple meetings and going out to the employer before some of the anxiety, depression, fears, past traumas might start coming up, which could be a potential barrier or a potential aid to kind of continue to focus and build boundaries around the actual job development goal. Moving into the educational experience, we really want to know what their interests are. If it's not work, are they interested in going back to school, going to school for the first time, vocational training? Maybe they do need some support to get their GED or high school diploma. Maybe they thought about apprenticeships with a union or through another work training program. Particularly, there could be some short-term and long-term certificate programs they could be able to enroll in to increase their skills and marketability in a certain career field. We also want to make sure if they have some of these things, are copies actually accessible? Sometimes I work with people who are homeless and they have to go to their storage unit, or maybe some extended family members, or maybe we actually have to go to the institution that they said they graduated from to actually get some of those documents. So I think that's also an important piece of the educational section to find out where some of these documents might be. In my experience, not everybody has been successful in getting through a training program. And it's also good to start that conversation. How the program ended. Was it abruptly? Was it a planned? separation? Did they use some services at the school for accommodation or for some advocacy? Maybe they didn't have good connections with the teacher or other students. So those are also potential places to kind of find out more about the job seeker and what their real desires are and what their comfort levels are as well. Any insight we can get into goals, unmet desires, missing supports, those type of things. If we could provide support and advocacy around that, maybe we can make them more successful in this current employment journey. We also want to focus on some school experience to see any past roadblocks, past barriers, some challenges. Maybe there's some issues about some of these programs where there might be some technology issues or a lack of technology skills. We also want to know if there's any learning barriers. Potentially there could be some learning disabilities or a different type of disability that hasn't been brought up to date until we get into some of the things about the school and educational programs. They're scrolling down here that sometimes there's more focus for planning and school training versus going to work right away. And that's still part of the IPS philosophy in terms of the independent placement and support. We really focus on employment, but we can also focus on educational plans. IPS has is very supportive of supported education in terms of helping the person get to their ultimate goal. Maybe there's some steps that are part of the process and we can be part of that. An important piece, if they're looking at that route, is to really investigate, has there been past financial aid distribution? Did they stop payments on those loans? Is there any past debt that might impact the next steps in obtaining training dollars for school? Sometimes those things need to be resolved, or a lot of people do need some help navigating to decide whether they can go into some type of loan program or not to pay for some of the services, or work with other community providers that may have scholarships or the Division of Vocational Rehab, which might be able to support educational goals depending on the client's eligibility and the specific goals that the person has. The employment specialist might have to contact student support services at different schools and training programs to make sure we're advocating for the client's success, plus be aware of potential accommodations that would help the individual in their school experience. Definitely, there's a lot of information on the school planning and school training piece. Jumping into the work experience section, it's a very chronological work experience process. Another daring request is, please do not just cross out this section and see resume on this profile. I know on my resume, I would never put some of the barriers, concerns, anxiety I have about my work experience. I would not put anything about lessons learned. It's all about me marketing myself. So this is the part that I really encourage people to spend some time on, just to find out, did they like the job? How did they find that job? Dislikes. Reason for leaving is really important. I've found out in working with some folks that people may put one thing on the form, and then if you're fortunate enough to get a release of information for a past employer, you get a totally different scenario of the relationship that the person had with the employer. Those things aren't going to be part of a resume. This is where we really want to put it, because this is, like I said, the foundations for building that relationship. There are some key notes that we could add to this section. I think it's always important to find out a little bit about environmental situations. Do people like to work with other people? Do they work better indoors, outdoors? What kind of work environment? It would be a dense work environment like a Costco, maybe even an Amazon, where it's very warehouse intense with a lot of moving parts and people. Is it more open space? Is it more really fast paced in a fast food establishment? Those type of things are really important to kind of know if somebody wants a crowded environment, more isolated work environment. Maybe it's a little bit more balanced for other people to see how they can work with others. Some people prefer indoors, some people prefer outdoors. Demographics might be a really important piece of the work experience process, and talking to people who are more in rural areas during some IPS reviews. Transportation is really an important piece of going back to work, and where people may not have access to the bus on a regular basis or very limited, may not have access to a car, might be walking or even using a bike to get to work. So those type of things could be really important in adding to the work experience process, where we kind of find out that could be a barrier. Maybe that was something they liked or did not like about the job, was the logistics about that situation. We can also find out a little bit more about a candidate's preference for supervision, maybe how long they might need to learn a task, a job duties, a position. What are their learning styles like? Another important piece that we might also learn is what kind of documents do they have right now to get to work. This will be addressed a little bit later, but it's those times that we want to kind of think about what are the resources a person might need as we're learning more about them and their job search process. It's also a good time to start thinking about the reference piece too, because it's always nice if we can verify references and that the client is actually telling people they're in the job search process and they're trying to go back to work, and they might use their friends or family or former coworker as a reference. We also want to know if people have had some military experience. That shows a lot of accomplishment for folks. It could also kind of talk about a lot of trauma that people may have had. It definitely is individualized, as most of this is, to find out a little bit more about some of the information that, even though the military experience is very brief, I think it's also good to find out what their rank was, where they may have trained, just to kind of create that dialogue to tease out more information about maybe some certifications or some experience that's going to be transferable into the civilian world of jobs. Cultural background, excuse me, I have to take a drink right here. This is the time where we want to look at, maybe there's some beliefs that are very important to the person. Maybe it could be family, maybe it could be a traditional family, non-traditional family, items that may be very important. It could include spiritual leaders or certain organizations that they're a part of that might impact their ability to work or hours of the day that they can work. It also is a good time to capture if they're multilingual. Maybe somebody has some ASL skills. Maybe somebody also has some computer language skills that could be very important in terms of building the foundation and looking for next steps in the job search process. This next step, as I said, is a very behavioral health focused piece, but it's also available from the client's perspective of what they're looking for and how things really can impact them. My perspective for this section is, what does it take to really make this job seeker to be successful out in the community? Are there going to be some past issues of trauma that might impact the process or the job seeker's functioning level? Is there some past history of stigma that they've lived through firsthand, which might impact potential disclosure down the road? Maybe there's some triggers that they've experienced in the workplace that could also be a barrier to employment. Maybe there's some different internal stimuli that be going on that could create anxiety or increased fear in terms of performing in a workplace. So those are all really important things that you can capture out of this kind of behavioral health job seeker perspective for the mental health side. It's also a good time, you know, if the person is self-identifying that they do have a behavioral health, substance use issues, maybe there's a co-occurring disorder with the behavioral health issues. These are the times where we can get a little bit more information to build this portfolio for the client before we do job development. And we also learn a little bit about the client's awareness or even self-acceptance of where they're at and what their needs might be. It could also be a time to talk a little bit about medications. You know, if they're taking medications prescribed, or maybe they're self-medicating through a different venue, and is that impacting their behavior, their motivation, some of their ability to show up for appointments on time or take on this change of going to work. I think the older I get, I think the more I focus on physical health. It's definitely so important. I'm going through that right now. I have some asthma-related issues, and having more ash in the air. I think there's more carbon dioxide in the air, experiencing headaches. It's just like we're all sensitive to the environment, and when we have more stressors about change and other outside physical stressors that we're going through right now with the fires and everything, really can change your health problems or how you adapt to new situations. I always like to focus in on some of these transferable issues about standing, sitting, climbing stairs, lifting. I think it's always good to touch base on these because we can take a look and see where there might be some support. Maybe there's some accommodations, or maybe there's some things that we should not even look at all because it could negatively impact somebody's physical health. I think it's always important to kind of check in to see if the person has a primary care provider and what they might be seeing that primary care provider for. Is it for diabetes? It could be for high blood pressure. Maybe there's some chronic pain issues, mobility issues, maybe some history of traumatic brain trauma, maybe some other trauma in their life that has some secondary issues through flare-ups of your own physical health. Definitely, it's also good to see maybe there's some specialists they've seen in the past. I've also met with people just going through this form where they talk about some major surgeries coming up. So it's a great time to find out what's gone on in the past, but also are they planning for some things in the future that might really change our ability to provide job development resources and time to have a job development plan right now if there's some other things coming up. So definitely, you know, range of motions are always good to talk about because I think any job you have is going to focus on some of these essential skills that somebody's going to be faced with in performing many job duties. Another part of the physical health piece that might be very important, if some people are thinking about driving positions, definitely some commercial driving positions do require Department of Transportation medical evaluation where a doctor might have to sign off on this every year. That could create a lot of anxiety. My team once had somebody who was really focused on becoming a bus driver, and due to the anxiety about going to the doctor's office, the employment specialist was able to go with the client to be part of that process, but her anxiety was so high because she was so fearful that she was concerned about her physical health was not to a standard that would allow her to do the job. Fortunately for her, it worked out and she was able to pass the physical, but there was just so many different things coming about through the fear and anxiety that was very detrimental to the client. But we needed to provide some individualized support to make it happen and be a little bit more successful for her. Moving into cognitive health, again, memory could be impacted by trauma, by medications, by substance use, previous trauma to the brain, loss of consciousness, having a blackout experience, maybe some other neurological trauma. Definitely I've worked with some people who have had a history of epilepsy. So it was really important that they were aware how they function in different environments and how they maintain their medication regime so that they could perform in different environments without adding risk to themselves or maybe some folks around them. We also want to know if maybe there's some history of accidents or falls. There's even some times where it might be appropriate to investigate if there was any domestic violence history that could also result in limited cognitive functioning due to traumatic brain injury. These are just all different ways that we can talk to somebody to learn more about their past and how we can help them, you know, fine-tune the services that we provide to help people get ready for a job. So sometimes when we're getting ready for a job, we need some help. Definitely many of the clients I work with, they need clothing. There might be some clothing banks. Historically, I've used the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation to help people get interview clothing and clothing for on the job. So that's been very helpful. I've also seen some other agencies where they're very creative internally to create some resources and share that with some of their staff to really help the clients. Some of the basics, picture ID, Social Security card. I've worked with people who want a job, but yet they lack some of these foundational documents to move forward. So we've had to spend some time in obtaining those, you know, identification before we can even move forward. You know, a resume. You know, part of this process is we're going to get information together to create a resume. They may already have one, and maybe we just have to do some updates and do some strategic tweaking to make the person more marketable for different positions. There's also a time maybe focus on some interview skills that they might need. If somebody wants to get in construction or driving or some other jobs, maybe there's some required safety equipment that they might need that we could start building around the resources. Sometimes agencies might have internal funds for work required clothing, boots, some emergency dollars that get people more of a fast track so that they can start work in a timely manner. Some people might also need help with just the food service health card, taking the test and be able to print that out for their documentations for their job search. How are we doing with questions and things, Dawn? Is there anything specific I should take a break for?
Nothing as yet. We had a comment about audio breaking up, but it's been fine since then, so thank goodness.
Oh, okay. Those are my
I'm going to steal the terminology strategic tweaking. I like that.
Well, I've had audio gremlins, so definitely give me a shout out if things shift here in my home office. Okay, moving on to interpersonal skills. It just starts off, you know, do you like interacting with the public? This is another opportunity to look at different types of jobs that people might be ready to jump into, whether they like to work with the public or they want something more non-public, non-customer service interaction. Definitely sometimes people are really good at the beginning talking about some of the work history about what they don't want to do. They don't want to do cashiering, they don't want to do customer service, just because for them right now maybe minimizing those contacts and potential conflict resolution isn't a strong point or could be triggers for them. We want to be sensitive to that as we get closer to job search. And we also want to start identifying maybe the supports that are going to be really beneficial for the job seeker, excuse me, who can help them think about different jobs that they would enjoy. Maybe they have friends and family who have said that they could really excel in certain areas. Maybe they have a passion about baking and talk a little bit more about those type of food industry, baking industry positions, or starting out to gently expose them to different types of job duties in the community. One thing that I like to do, and it's a little bit about the interpersonal and a little bit about work history, is just sometimes just taking people out into the community and exposing them to different environments. So maybe they're not really sure what a cashier does, or what a courtesy clerk is, or what a sales manager does. Going out and doing some observations is a great way to kind of give people that foundation. Taking this to another level would be looking at motivation, not motivational interviewing, but informational interviews, excuse me, for individuals, so that they could learn more about different positions that they might like to try. Some of the things that we can put down in terms of support for people, maybe there's some recovery support networks that they're part of. Maybe through their church, or there's some spiritual support networks that they have. Maybe they're involved with NAMI in My Own Voice, and they're able to go out and practice some of those public speaking skills. That might be beneficial in terms of sales, customer service, management type things. So there might be some things that people are already involved in, and we just have to tease out a little bit more to kind of see where those connections are aligning. Particularly if they are involved, some of those groups, there could be some potential for additional release of information that we could build on references, or ask other people for some insight into what they think the person might do well. I know a lot of people come into the supportive employment programs with some goals, and some people come in with emergency jobs as goals, and that's all great. Definitely going through IPS reviews, I've definitely seen some progression where people start with the emergency jobs and kind of build into their dream job through that, individual placement and support services that we currently provide services. And for many of you, we'll start to be providing those services. So the next section is about benefits. And as you can see, it's pretty small. So this is just a super simplistic overview of benefits. We just want to know what benefits they're having, because this will provide the base to do a more in-depth benefit analysis later. And I know not every agency has access to a certified benefits planner. There are some tools and some resources that are available that will attach to this presentation. But there's a site called Pathways to Employment where they have some worksheets that you can use. During one review, somebody was saying that the Red Book at Social Security, there's some resources online through Social Security too, to talk about some resource management and how income will impact any federal or state benefits people have. And I think it's also important to really focus on some of the housing benefits and food stamps benefits and the Medicaid, because those could all change when somebody goes back to work. And my philosophy and that of IPS is we really want to let people decide which route they want to go in terms of how much education they need. Definitely people have the right to say decline those services, but we really want to see people starting the questions early and revisiting this as somebody begins the job search process and actually starts the job, just to see if there's any changes, or maybe the working relationship with people is becoming more comfortable, so they feel more at ease and more trust to focus on some of these more sensitive benefits. There are some FCS, Foundational Community Support vendors, who do standalone certified benefit planner assessments, so that might be an additional resource for folks. Division of Vocational Rehab also has access to some certified benefit planners, so that might be another process to request that benefit as somebody is going through the eligibility process for DVR services. Sometimes there's also people who are ready to leave the system, and they're pretty upfront about it. We still want to make sure that they know about some of the safety nets and some of the long-term benefits that they could still take advantage of if their job ends. So there's definitely, it's a very braided system of a lot of information, technical information about income and what current benefits are. So please keep in mind, definitely start building up some of those resources to address this multiple times in the job search process. The other thing that this form doesn't really talk about is sometimes people go back to work and maybe they have a payee, which could be a family member, and the family member is getting some secondary gain from having control of those finances and assets. So there might be also somebody else involved in the bigger picture in terms of benefit education. Because if somebody goes to work and they have a payee, we want to make sure they're in the loop and that they know what's going on, because they're the people who are the legal representative for the client with those benefits. So that would be an additional question to ask your job seeker candidates about if they have that service or not. Disclosure is another process that we like to see addressed multiple times when we go through the IPS review process. This is definitely a great first start to get some information up front about the person. I've seen many times where people don't want an employment specialist going out in the community sharing information, but I think once that relationship builds and prospers, people might need some more help where they really need this. And that's why we really encourage people to review this a couple times through the job search process, and even when somebody starts a job. I know there are many times where people are very focused on doing things themselves, and we want to honor that process, but then there could be some times where an employment specialist could be a great advocate to talk to an employer, particularly maybe as we get close to 90 days, where employers might be looking at people's productivity, how they're fitting into the system, maybe negotiate another 30-day extension. I actually had an employment specialist in the program I manage was able to advocate for an extension of the 90-day evaluation, just because that person had to go to the job site more, do some education with the employer about this individual's learning process, and that they were open to receiving additional support from the employment specialist and to give that person some additional time to learn the job. There is another form that's more specific on the ipsworks.org website that kind of has more of a graph of pros and cons that you can use. And for people who might be more visually, kind of like myself, you can kind of put those things in different quadrants and kind of see what the ultimate outcome is. And it's always good to just reassure people about not disclosing very private public health information unless they give you that authorization to do it. Definitely, I've seen people and agencies reviewed utilizing ROIs to cover those entities to share more information about the client's functions and roles. Substance use, this is also a very brief evaluation. I know I've worked with some SUD programs where, you know, they use the ASAM criteria, and there's dimensions 1 through 6. So definitely this section does not, you know, pull in a lot of information from those very thorough evaluations. I think it's always good to really work with other substance use disorder clinicians to get some of that information, and also really target on dimension 6 where it talks about recovery. What are people going to be doing in the community? Are they going to have some structure? Are they going to be involved in some integration? Or are they going to go back into the same environment that they just left and go back into? One thing I've learned about working with people with substance disorders is that cash, paychecks, paydays can also be triggers for folks. So it's always good to see if they do have, you know, some budget skills, some plans, what to do with that, and do some follow-up with people after that first paycheck. Legal history. We really want to know if people have been involved, or maybe even currently involved. Maybe they have some pending charges that they're dealing with right now. Maybe there's some probation condition. Maybe there's even court reports that your agency is doing, and your information could really be valuable to keep that person involved in the community, involved in your organization. You might even have to look at some ROIs for some of these institutions and legal contacts so that you have some way to correspond with the authorities in these situations. And I think it's always also good to kind of think about where the individual job seeker is at in terms of their past criminal offenses. I know I've worked with people where they actually do a letter to kind of explain the situation and what has changed. And maybe just going through the written process and doing some role-playing strategies with the client that you can discuss all the positives and the life changes that the person has gone through to get where they're at now, and take some responsibility and ownership for the past and where they really want to focus moving forward. Now, even that process is not going to stop an employer from following their mandates or their policies and procedures if they do background checks or not. That would be something that you as an agency would have to look at. I know at agency I worked at, I wasn't able to do run background checks to verify some folks, particularly if they were in multiple states. And I would refer those individuals to the Division of Voc Rehab to see if they could support us with some of that information. So we could just get a clearer picture of where the client is. That would really help people in terms of what direction we're going to assist them in looking for work. Sometimes the legal history is a severe barrier that could relate to the dream job. People can still have those dreams, but there are some real legal limitations in terms of what we can do and what we can produce. And that's the educational process that we can assist people in to make educated and informed decisions. I was just reviewing a chart in one review, and I've just noticed how many legal convictions pieces that are here. And unfortunately, they had just crossed this whole section out, but in another assessment, the person had like 17 or 18 felonies. So I'm not saying we have to put all 17 down, but it would be good to put somewhere here just relating to the extensive criminal history that some of the individuals coming into your program might be facing, and some of the things that could be a potential barrier as you go out and talk to employers into the community. This one is always kind of fun because we also want to know, what are you doing now during the day? Are people going to WorkSource? Are they doing job search on their own? Are they isolating at home? Are they doing psychosocial supports? Are they doing any of those activities that might be part of a NAMI network, a recovery network, a recovery cafe? Those might be potential other things we could do for resources or references for the person. It's also nice to know where people like to go. Where are they comfortable? Where do they feel safe? What places are they able to get to on their own? What is their knowledge of the transit system and how mobile are they in the community. Maybe they have some hobbies that might be of interest that they'd like to do more of. Or maybe they would like to get a job so they can enhance their ability to do their hobbies and invest in those interests. I think typical sleep hours is always important. Maybe they have different sleep and awake cycles. For those people, I have a lot of history with folks in the behavioral health, mental health field that are on a lot of prescribed medications. Maybe those medications can impair those cycles. So I think it's always important to always kind of take a look at the sleep cycles as well as medications that they might be taking as we move through the process. And it's always important to sign and date the document because we always want to know when the document was and if you're revisiting it. It could be fine just to do a quick clinical note that sat down, went over their career profile with Darren. He didn't update with any new goals or anything. Things are still status quo, or maybe there's some changes and we can add that to this document or to a note. So definitely for me, a strong encouragement to take a look at this as a living document and add to it and reflect on it. So when would you want to update the career profile? Talking about a job search. Maybe there's some certifications that have just been achieved. Maybe one job ended and a new job started. Maybe there's a change in interest. You start one job, it's an emergency job, and really decide that's not what you had focused on and have a lot of interest, and you want to move on to something else. There are people I've seen, there's also ongoing legal involvement where that would be a good time to update the profile as well. Job loss, maybe desire for wage progression, job duties significantly change. Maybe they want a job opportunity with more growth and status. Maybe the management at the company where the client is working has changed, which is creating some stress and trauma. That would be important for us to share and know about. Or moving into a formal benefit review with a certified planner for that. Definitely this document, it really lets people know, has a great roadmap for maybe if you're handing the case off to another employment specialist coming into your program without going through another 14 pages of questions to start that process again with folks. I think that's about all I have, Dawn, for my presentation. Are there any additional questions or thoughts to share from the chat box?
I don't see any, and I think your timing is perfect because you just started to sound a little robot-y again. You're good.
Ooh, made it.
So,
well, I guess it's good for a break, huh?
It is perfect. I'm thinking it's a perfect time for a break. So if folks would like to take like a 5-minute break, 5-10-minute break, come back by no later than 5 after, if you would please. But I know what webinars are like. It's probably a nice time to get up and stretch and get a glass of water and just, you know, clear your head for a minute. So come back in no later than 5 after, please.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Darren. And I will say for those of you still here, then I'll start in on the Medicaid information, which I suspect is entirely new to some folks and old hat to others. So we'll see.
Should I go ahead and change presenter then? Or do you do that, Dawn?
I think
I
Darren
can
should.
do it. I think I'm hoping that it's actually the one that says
Oh, there it went.
yeah, and I'm going to minimize everything that I've got on the screen before I accept it. And Darren, you'll get to be the one probably to monitor the questions.
Okay.
All right. Can you see my screen?
I can. Learning objectives.
All right. We're in the right spot. I'll go ahead and do the slideshow as well. Maybe. There we go. Now we got it. All right. I'll be right back.
Okay.
You know, it amazes me that even in a tightly shut up house, you can still smell smoke. And I don't know if anybody else is experiencing the same thing, but I'm looking forward, not for that reason, obviously, for the safety of others and the health of others. I'm looking forward to the fires being put out. But I have to say, for my house not also smelling like smoke, I'm looking forward to the fires being put out.
Yeah, no, you can smell it. It must be coming from the intake, right? I mean, like.
Yeah, I've seen lots of potential solutions, like taking a box fan and attaching a furnace filter to the back of it, actually cleaning the air to some degree. Doing things like putting a pot of water with, you know, maybe some essential oil, some sage or things like that, and it might clear the air and pull the smoke down. But it's just amazing to have to go to those lengths for your house not to smell like smoke.
Yeah, because most of us, one of the things that we could do is we could go outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't gone out in my garden for days and days and days. Before that, it was too hot. Now it's too smoky, and so the weeds are happy that I'm indoors. They won't be for long. Sooner or later, I will have a weed-free garden. So I had a text from Joni from Rutgers asking how things were and how people are. And I was telling her about fires in the state of Washington and that a couple of small towns have been essentially wiped off the map south of Spokane, and that there's lots and lots and lots of people in danger and lots of folks whose homes are in danger. And she's from New Jersey, and her comment was, "I can't even imagine." And I think that's probably what a lot of folks are going through right now. They can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that the call is safe and not currently in jeopardy. And but I think we did a good thing to cancel the last one, or this one, when we first had it scheduled, because I think things are more dire than they are now. I think things have settled to some degree. So I'm glad we canceled the first one.
Well, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to emails at all, but we did get an answer from Janet that you guys are going to want to read.
Oh, reading for later.
I saw that. I was paying attention to emails because sometimes people have difficulties getting into the webinar, so I try to kind of pay attention early on to help people to get in if they're stuck. And we didn't have any of those. That was good.
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah, good news. Thank you, Lisa, for checking.
I'll provide you guys a form that I don't know why everybody doesn't have it, but where for just amending a date.
Oh,
yeah.
There's a
that
form.
would be wonderful. There's a form.
And I know it's kind of funny, but it's not, because they yeah.
Well, that would be great. Thank you for that. I didn't realize there was a form.
There's a form that when you're just making a simple change, it's useful because you only have to do one for all of them that you identify.
Oh, see, that's even better.
No, yeah, let me think through it.
And I think I am going to start out with a plug for, please, send us your A19s and your billing as soon as you are able for things that you have done.
Oh, good idea.
Because you paid for those things.
Yeah, I did that in the beginning of the presentation, but it probably wouldn't hurt.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that part when I was getting things ready, I think. And it looks like we're just about there.
There we go.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get in, and I deliberately have the chat box open because I want to get some kind of a sense. And I'm going to ask the question first, and then I'm going to provide some information while you're typing in. But I'd like to get some kind of sense about how many people know about Medicaid documentation versus those that don't. So if you could just say, familiar with Medicaid or not at all familiar with Medicaid or whatever in the chat box, so that I can kind of get an idea of where we're at. It will either cause me to do more detail about some of the slides or less. So if everybody knows about Medicaid, I'm going to breeze right on through. After all, it's a thrilling and enthralling topic. So,
Dawn, do you want me to interrupt you with questions or kind of take a break every 15 minutes to check in?
Go ahead, and as you see them, I'll try and take a breath and check in with you too, but if for some reason I don't, and here I'm seeing already a couple not familiar with Medicaid, somewhat familiar with Medicaid. So, go ahead and if a few more of you at least would give me some not at all, okay. And I know those of you that are familiar with Medicaid will forgive me for speaking to those folks that are not at all familiar. So that's kind of where we're going to go with this part of the topic, because it's important. It's very important. It is. It's how you're going to get paid, is if you paid, if you do well with your documentation, that you're submitting to AmeriGroup, that's how you're going to get paid. So this is important. While folks are writing in too, I'm going to mention Lisa had checked for us to find out if we could extend the dates for billing. And we can, but I'm still going to encourage everybody, as they're done with trainings or with different tasks for this contract, please send in your A19s, your invoices, so that we can send them on to billing so that you can get paid for them. So Lisa got us some good news, which is a good thing, but do please, you know, make sure to get your A19 sent in. Let's see, I'm aware, familiar, just a little bit, could use a refresher. It's a great reminder and refresher. So it's sounding like a lot of folks are, if they already know about it, they're still willing to hear more. So that's a good thing. I appreciate that. Thanks for your responses, guys. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my hope today is to do an introduction to Medicaid documentation rules. I am not the Medicaid expert. Having said that, I worked in an agency for 21 years where we had to do Medicaid billable documentation. So I know some. And I'm going to share with you what I know. I'm going to provide copies of the slides after the fact. And then I'm going to provide you with links for the documentation guide that the HCA had developed. And then I may also send you some other information about Medicaid documentation. I am not expecting that you're going to be an expert after this webinar. Far from it. I'm expecting that you'll have the basics if you don't know anything about it, and have the opportunity to do a little more research and reading. So that's kind of where I'm at. It is important to be able to complete detailed documentation as the foundation for coding, billing, and quality of care for the participant. What I found, having worked in a behavioral health agency, is documenting per what Medicaid expected caused the note to be thorough enough that if somebody else needed to look and see what was going on with a person, they could pretty well tell. And it's important to learn how insufficient documentation leads to poor service collaboration and improper payments. One of the IPS principles talks about sharing documentation in the files, so that employment service documentation should be available for other staff to see. And whether you're a behavioral health agency or some other kind of agency, if there's more than one staff person working with the person, it's important to collaborate for both staff people to know where each one stands. So good documentation does that for folks. All right, let's see if I can get my computer to advance slides. I've got it up on the screen and it's going nowhere. And that's because I think my computer froze. Isn't that interesting? Oh, there we go. Now it unfroze. That's a good thing. So if you're familiar with Medicaid documentation, you've heard the terminology medical necessity. If you're not familiar, it'll be new to you, but it's kind of the key to things. Medicaid pays for medical services. Is this medical service? Absolutely. I don't know if you guys have seen the studies that says a kind of a range of ages that people die earlier than those of us that are employed at all times. Anybody who's chronically unemployed, one of the statistics that I've seen has said that they die 25 years earlier than the population that's typically employed, for a lot of different reasons, and it's a horrifying statistic. I've heard anything from 10 to 25 years. Is it okay that people die 10 years earlier than those of us that are typically employed? No, it's not. Does that make it a medical issue? Yes, it does, which is why Medicaid is actually paying for the service. So per definition, the service is reasonably calculated to prevent, diagnose, correct, cure, alleviate, or prevent worsening of conditions in the client that endanger life or cause suffering or pain, or result in an illness or infirmity, or threaten to cause or aggravate a handicap, or cause physical deformity or malfunction. That's not my definition. That's definitely per the WAC. It seems to me it needs a little upgrading. In the case of supported employment, there are other options that may not be suitable for the individual in question. Bottom line, the treatment interventions must help the person get better, or at the very least, prevent a worsening of the person's health. Medical necessity requires that all services and interventions be directed at a medical problem or diagnosis and be necessary in order that the service can be billed. And I'll explain, that medical diagnosis piece as we go. And that it's a claims-based model that requires each service or encounter on a standalone basis reflects the necessity for that treatment intervention. And it defines there what's meant by standalone. When I supervise staff, I always talk to them about the fact that they were telling a story and they needed to read their note from the standpoint of the audience that's out there reading the note, and that a person should be able to read that note and get enough information about what's going on with the person in that note to be able to kind of move forward and talk with them about things that were also relevant to that, whatever that topic might be. So why document it? You coordinate services, provide continuity of care amongst practitioners or staff. You furnish, I'm going to say, more than sufficient services, good services. You improve care. You comply with regulations. You support claims billed, reduce improper payments, and you cover yourself. The medical record is, in fact, a legal document. If at some point in time someone in the future was to complain about your service, and you can go back to your note and read through that and state very clearly what's been done, that's something that ends up covering yourself. So I'll talk in a minute about golden thread. But in documenting medical necessity, there's a service plan that demonstrates the clinical need. And it usually relates to ADL skill deficits or role dysfunction in relationship to employment. There should be a reasonable expectation that SC services listed on the plan will improve symptoms and level of functioning. And there are symptoms, because folks wouldn't qualify for FCS if there weren't symptoms of something. And it's a frequency, setting, and type of provider should be appropriate to the severity of the illness. So here's the golden thread kind of thing. I'm going to say, when we're talking medical necessity, diagnosis, and all that kind of thing, my favorite way of explaining it related to employment services is, why isn't your participant getting Uncle Bob to help him? If Uncle Bob had the qualifications and the ability to help the person, they would. Something is requiring them to need a little more extra special expertise, which you've got, and you need to document in the notes with that extra special expertise. Not so much what it is, but why they need that. So if somebody's experiencing anxiety, what is it about your service that's going to address the anxiety? If somebody has difficulties with organizing because of a diagnosis of one sort or another, and there are several that would cause that difficulty in organizing, then they need your service, and say how you've addressed that difficulty in organizing. So it's a medical justification, but as a common sense kind of an issue related to the diagnosis, typically when it's supported employment. So those of you that are familiar with Medicaid probably have heard of golden thread, and it's the kind of the thread, if you will, of documentation that should be linked together in order to support what it is you're doing with the person. Starts out with an assessment, and it says and diagnosis. So your career profile could be that assessment. At the end of the career profile, there's the opportunity to say, so now that we've gotten all this wonderful information, what are we doing with it? What's your goal? What are we going to move towards? That's the kind of thing that you're going to draw from in order to write a care plan, a service plan, a treatment plan, a recovery plan, some kind of plan that has goals and objectives related to the services. And it says right diagnosis, right place, right time, right amount. So treatment planning is what they're referring to it here. When you do that plan, the way you report back to that plan is you write a progress note each time you do a service. And you relate it back to what was the goal in the treatment plan? Well, here's what we worked on. And then you're going to review that plan on a regular basis. And most agencies do 6 months or as the objective has been met. And so if you've written an objective and it's something you think is going to take a month and it does, then you need to write a new objective. You've always got to have a current objective that you're working on. The components of the golden thread, the assessment or career profile in this case, or perhaps in some cases, if you're a behavioral health agency, it may come from the intake. The individual service plan, treatment plan, care plan, recovery plan, whatever it is, and progress notes are your components of the golden thread. Is this all making sense so far? And I'm going to pull out the, I see some more familiar, could use refresher and that kind of thing. Is this making sense? Is this sounding like what you were hoping to hear so far? And go ahead and feel free to type into the chat box about that. And Darren, I know you'll let me know what folks are having to say.
So far, all quiet on the chat box frontier.
And of course, my computer froze again. So, you know, I kind of lightheartedly said, if Uncle Bob could do it, why doesn't Uncle Bob do it? When I think back on doing service plans and writing notes and that kind of thing, and we'll talk more about the fact that they've got to be in the person's voice. It's got to be their plan. It can't be my plan that I'm imposing on them. It's got to be their plan. But the getting down to what was meaningful to them, what they wanted to do, what kinds of things stood in their way of doing it that I could help with, those are sometimes hard conversations to have. And Darren mentioned it time and again when he was talking about the career profile. Their career profile isn't just a document. It's a tool for getting to know a person. And the more they start to trust you and the more they start to get to know you, the more likely they are to actually come up with meaningful, like we all are. We don't spill our guts to a stranger. It just doesn't happen typically. The more a person gets to know you, the more that they will share information with you related to what are some of the issues that end up being a problem for me, or what are some of the things that cause me to not be able to do what I'm hoping to do. And oh, there we go. Yay! So I apologize for the computer lag. Evidently, that's the way it's going to be today, so we'll just work around it. So within the golden thread, there are documented assessed needs that come from hopefully that career profile or maybe from whatever intake you've got within your agency. The needs lead to specific goals. There are treatment goals with measurable objectives. I think that's one of the hardest things for a brand new staff to come up with. But if you think about it in terms of how do I know when I'm done? If I said develop a resume, when I've written the resume, do I know I'm done? Absolutely. If I say get a job, do I know when I'm done? Yes, but that may be too broad a goal. It may be get a job that where I'm working 20 hours a week in a setting that allows for little customer contact. I think it may get down to some real specifics so that the goal that I've set is something that the person truly wants. How you get a person a job as a truck driver? Did they want to be a truck driver? Not necessarily. So it needs to be measurable. It needs to have some specificity, but lets you know when you've actually made it to that point. And there are specific interventions that relate to the services being provided by the employment specialist. That also relates back to your AMER group contract and what it is that they've said you are able to bill under. So your interventions, your coding are going to fall under things like pre-employment services and employment sustaining services. And some of your objectives are going to relate to those as well. And taking a look. And I'm actually going to read Angie's Angie's question myself. Is it okay to have the goals embedded in the client's entire treatment plan, or will you be looking for a separate plan when you're doing reviews? I know it talks about documentation being inclusive to the client's electronic health record, but I was not sure if it's desirable to maintain a separate employment plan or add employment goals to the original individual service plan. What I was always told when I did that is it's best to have it in the same plan as is the one for the remainder of the staff within the agency. It may be a separate goal and objective, but it's within the same plan. Why do you do it that way? Because then the other staff in the agency or clinicians or whatever they may be, they know about what's going on and they can dovetail. Far easier to do that if it's all in the same plan than if they have to look at a separate plan. Because the likelihood is folks are busy enough, they're not going to do that. So if it's all in the same plan, maybe a different goal and objective, but in the same plan, then it's much more accessible to the other folks that are providing services to people. All right, let's see if I can make this advance. Nope. Oh, goodness. I love technology, don't you guys? Come on. You can do it. I don't have a voice-activated computer, but I continue to think if you talk nicely to it, it might be even do what you're hoping to have it do. And it's not.
Maybe if you don't talk nice to it.
Oh, I do a good job of not talking nice some of the time, but I don't think you guys want to hear that. Lisa's actually one of the very best people I know because she says sugar when she's intending it to be something else. And we were in a meeting today earlier. I said the something else, and that's what I tend to do more than anything. So
well, you mute yourself.
Okay, it's going to happen here in just a second because I pushed the forward button about 6 times and it's doing nothing. And I pushed the escape button. Oh, and I escaped. You know what? And I might just leave it at this point in time because I seem to be able to move forward. And you guys get a preview of coming attractions in regards to the slides that way. So one of the really important principles related to service planning for individuals is that it's person-centered planning. And there's some very basic principles related to that. How many of you appreciate having to work on goals that are not yours and that you don't buy into? I don't think anybody does. And obviously, if it's a work-related kind of thing, even if you're not bought in, you do them anyway. But when it comes to your life choices, typically you want to have the say in what's going to end up happening. So individual service plans are person-centered planning. And the basic principles include things like the directions from the individual, but they may involve family and friends, people that love them or care about them and are involved in their day-to-day life are good sources of information and good sources of support. If those family and friends are in on service planning, they're right there to be able to chime in with what kind of support can they provide. There's a reliance on personal relationships as a primary source of support. We hope to work ourselves out of a job. We hope to not provide services to people forevermore. We hope that they learn skills from us and are able to move on. And if we've built in those natural supports along the way, it's much easier to do that. There's a positive focus on capacities and assets of the individuals, not limitations. I have joked that in truth, it's a serious kind of thing where I have an anxiety disorder, and when I first started doing supported employment, there are people that would say this person has to be absolutely free of symptoms before they go to work. If they said that about me, I would never have worked. I really would not have. And so it's a focus on my capacities, my abilities. It's a focus on the capacities and abilities of the individual. It's not a focus on the limitations. People will surprise you every single time in regards to things that they can do if they set their mind to it. Focus on routinely available settings, services, and supports, and tolerance for uncertainty, setbacks, false starts, and disagreements. I've also said that I can pretty well guarantee that there's not a person listening that is in the first job that they ever obtained. They're probably in a second or a third or a fourth or 15th job. And so there have been potentially false starts in jobs and setbacks and disagreements up through to the point that you find the job that works for you. Some of the other core values of person-centered planning, it's not just person-centered, it's person-driven. I had a person on my caseload one time that I was explaining this principle, and she said, so it's like you're the GPS and I'm the driver. And I said, that is such a good analogy. I'm going to steal it and use it from this point on. And it really is that kind of thing. The GPS may say turn left, and you may decide to go straight, and it'll say recalculating, or the old style ones did. And it allows you to make those changes because they relate to what you want to do as opposed to what it's telling you to do. You know, maybe you want to take that detour along the way. But I loved her analogy. It needs a facilitative advocate. So anybody in services probably either doesn't have all the knowledge that they need, or perhaps not all the skills that they need, or perhaps not all the resources that they need. Maybe they have all the skills and all the knowledge, but they don't have the resources they need to be able to move forward. So it needs a facilitative advocate. Transfers power from the professional to the individual. I don't know if my colleagues have noticed, but I rarely use the word client because I think it sets up a dynamic that I don't like. I talk about people that I provide services to. I talk about individuals. I talk about this person or that person because that levels the playing field. It doesn't make me the expert because they are the expert in their life. It makes me another individual that has skills and knowledge to share with them, but kind of on a par with them. It involves action as well as planning. It's based on a positive framework, dreams and aspirations. Darren mentioned one of the questions in the career profile is, what is your dream job? And it's interesting, when I had a caseload for 21 years, and when I would do the career profile, and we'd talk about what kind of job you want, they'd say this or that. And when you'd say, what's your dream job? It was amazing some of the answers that you get. It changes the focus entirely from, you know, I'll work at McDonald's, to I always wanted to be a cake decorator or a wedding planner or a, you know, carpenter or a this or that. So that positive framework, dreams and aspirations, is huge. It's getting multiple perspectives as a way of generating creative brainstorming forms based on the process. So if the person allows others to come in, even if it's just you and that person, and you've kind of leveled the playing field to, you know, I'm not the expert, I'm you, you are. Let's talk about, and I'll help you. I'll provide some information about resources and things. It causes a scenario that's very creative because the person feels more empowered. And the most important thing to be facilitated is the process, the planning, the follow-up, replanning, not the meeting itself. So it is a process. It's a process that takes as long as it takes. And one of the nice things about FCS is if a person's not done yet, you can do a reauthorization for another 6 months of time. If they are not done, if they've used a lot of services in the first 6 months, you can do an exception and get additional hours in that first 6 months. So there really is a mechanism for it to be able to take as long as it takes. There's not a specified time that it takes for everybody. Talking about goals, I think early on I would ask people, what are your goals? And they were kind of like, I don't know. And when you get to the point of talking about dreams, aspirations, hopes, you can see that little spark. You can see that you know, the light bulb goes on, kind of a thing. Whereas if you ask about goals, I think you very often get, wow, same old, I'm in another social service agency, as opposed to a setting where a person really cares about what you want to move forward with. How are we doing question-wise? We got anything?
Nothing new.
Nothing new. Okie dokie. So components of the individual service plan, treatment plan, recovery plan, whatever it is you call it, we will call them goals. We don't necessarily have to say that to the folks that we're serving, but we will call them goals. So written in the first person, I will do something by something date. It addresses things like barriers to achievement. Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it a lack of skills? Is it a lack of resources? Darren mentioned when he was talking about career profiles that sometimes folks don't want to go to work immediately because their long-term goal is one that requires an education. And supported education is a foundational community support service. It's actually also supported by individual placement and support. It's a service we can provide, and it makes perfect sense in regards to the progression for some folks if they've got a job that they want to do that needs that college degree or that vocational certificate or you know, like a certified peer counselor going through a short-term training kind of thing and a licensure kind of thing. It does support that. Objectives, also known as steps or short-term goals. Proposed interventions specify who, where, and how often. I think sometimes folks come in not wanting to work with us even though they've said they had. And I think the more that we show our enthusiasm with, I'm here for you, I'm available for you, let's talk about how often you need, and that's what we'll do. I think the more you do those kinds of things, the more they see that this person really does care. They do want to work with me. They do want me to succeed. And I think the more that we do that relationship building, the better plan we are going to have, the better vocational assessment we're going to have. It makes a big difference. So key elements of a quality objective. And this one was written more behavioral healthy. So person's name, Mark, action word, will manage anxiety. What? By using the coping skill of deep breathing. When? Once a day in response to anxiety for 6 months. How measured? As reported by himself in Wellness Self-Management Group. Equals an objective in this particular case. And like I say, that one's written fairly mental healthy, but if you look at the person's name, plus the action word, plus the what, plus the when, plus how measured, you're going to get an actual measurable objective. At the end of this, at the end of Mark will manage anxiety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's both Mark and the clinician going to know when they're done. Yeah, once a day in response to anxiety for 6 months as reported by himself in the Wellness Self-Management Group. That's something that's actually measured and the person knows when they are done. So one of the things that pretty much any time you hear about objectives, goals and objectives, you're going to hear SMART, the SMART framework. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time framed. That also is going to help you to end up with something that by the time the person's done with it, they're going to know what it is that they've accomplished in order to get to that point. It doesn't have to, and in this case, shouldn't be written in jargonese. I joke about the fact that we all speak in alphabet soup. IPS, ISP, FDS. And I think when we do that, we tend to forget that perhaps the person on the other end doesn't know what the heck we're talking about. So documentation should be straightforward, shouldn't use jargonese, should be very specific about what's going on. Measurable. Measurable means there's typically going to be some kind of number in there. Even if there's not a number per se, if I say Dawn will complete a resume, there is a number. That's 100%. It's a 1. It's a it's inferred that there's a number in there, so it is still measurable. Attainable should require some effort, but seem reachable. In the 21 years that I worked for the mental health agency, and we had auditors come through that would look at our records and tell us how we were doing. I think we very often wrote, Dawn will get a job. Yeah, it's measurable. For some people, it was going to take a month. For other people, it might take months or years. I think we had a young man in the program of a person who I was supervising, and I want to say it took us a year to help him actually successfully find a job that fit for him, that he was able to keep and that he liked. So yeah, getting a job is measurable. For some people, it's going to be way too big a goal. For other folks, it might be easily attainable within a 6-month time. And the reason that I encourage a 6-month time or a shorter time frame than like a year or length of the program or whatever is these goals, and the achievement of goals helps people with maintaining their level of hope. It is something that is it's part of that positive framework we want to put together. It's part of the empowering of people. It's part of, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm a task list kind of person, and I love being able to check things off of my to-do list. It actually gives me a sense of accomplishment. Well, this is that kind of thing too. So maybe consider objectives that are smaller than larger. Maybe consider things, especially for a person with low self-esteem, that they can start ticking them off and really feel like they're accomplishing something as they're moving towards your employment. Let's see. Realistic to both the person's needs and program services. We would do job coaching for those folks that needed it. And that was certainly not a lot of the people that we served, but it was some. In the objective, we might need to put in that a family member was going to help with transportation, or that a coworker was going to take over the kind of, you know, prompting a person about some small thing, or things along that line, because related to job coaching, it wasn't something that we could do at a high level forevermore. So the services needed to be, realistic for the program services and for the person's needs. So sometimes we built in some natural supports in regards to those objectives and the interventions that were there. And then provide a clear timeline for the work. That's part of that ticking off of the objectives and being able to say that they accomplished it. If a person needs a job within a month because they're going to lose their housing, we did our very best to try and help them find some kind of job within a month. But we also recognized it may or may not be their dream job. We might need to continue working on that dream job. Very important to have that clear timeline to know what it is that you're doing. Most interventions should focus on improving or restoring functioning. Typically, the objectives that worked on just maintaining may not be doing a proper service for the person. We all have goals and objectives, and I think probably very few of our own goals and objectives are a maintain this or that kind of objective. It's shooting for more. It's improving upon things. It's improving our quality of life. So most interventions should focus on improving or restoring functions. Emphasize functioning in chosen environments. But one of the nice things about IPS and having done employment services for probably 35 years, maybe more than that when I think about it. My first job in the supported employment field was in 1981, and it was in a sheltered workshop, which I'm thankful to say we don't have anymore, typically, very rarely. And it was a scenario in which we pretty much help people maintain what they had and not shoot for the stars, not improve their quality of life. I remember being the program manager that looked at folks in the sheltered workshop and said, I don't know why this person's not out in the job, so I'm going to help them find one. I got in trouble for doing that because it was a shooting for the stars kind of a thing, but it took away one person who the agency was getting paid for. So, but I can tell you for certain that the gal who ended up getting the housekeeping job in the hotels was tickled to death with her increased wage and her feeling of being, and these are her words, not mine, normal. She loved that. She thought it was marvelous. So it was improving her scenario, not just maintaining. It emphasizes much less caretaking and doing for, and far more emphasizes collaboration and doing with. I know there was a time when I wasn't particularly good about avoiding the mom function and doing for people things that they were really capable of doing for themselves. And it's so much more empowering and so much more sets the stage for us working our way out of a job and having the person be capable enough to do for themselves if we do along with as opposed to doing for. And then it seeks out and uses teachable moments. And hopefully that's the case in the services we provide in general, as we're looking for those teachable moments. Treatment plan, quality plan, should be linked to the needs assessment. That's one of the things, you know, in hearing the auditors over the years, and I really did learn a lot from them. If the service plan, or excuse me, if the assessment said they had anxiety and they wanted to go to school, and my treatment plan said they were depressed and were going to go to college and they needed support in this or that way, we'd get questioned as to why. You know, we'd get questions as to why in the assessment, if it said the anxiety in school, are you doing, you know, whatever. It made it sound like we were looking at two different people, and it didn't provide that documentation to show how did the person get from point A to point B, because maybe they changed their mind and maybe they had a diagnosis of both things, and maybe that wasn't clear in the assessment. But it didn't allow other practitioners to be on the same page as we were, so we had to be careful about that, and it's a lesson I learned and actually appreciated. It includes the desired outcomes relevant to the presenting problems and symptoms, utilizing the client's words. Every once in a while there'd be somebody on my caseload who would use wording that I knew came from another staff person, and in fact a clinician. I want to modulate my depression by doing such and such. That's not what you're going to hear. You're going to hear, I really want to be able to get out of bed every morning on time and not feel so tired. And I don't want to feel like I'm sitting on the couch and not doing anything because I'm not motivated to get up. And I don't want to, or I do want to, or whatever. So you're going to use the client's words so that they also know when they're ready to move along, when they've mastered what it was that they hope to be able to do. Have a clear goal statement, include measurable objectives using those SMART goals. Use client strengths and skills as resources. I'm going to tell my favorite story of all time. And Darren and Lisa have both heard this one, and some of you may as well. I had a gal on my caseload who had been a prostitute and a drug dealer. Now, even right off the bat, hearing that, I'm thinking, wow, somebody with an entrepreneurial spirit, and don't laugh, I really did think that. Anybody that could be a drug dealer and a prostitute had to have great survival skills, had a lot of skills and strengths going for them. And so she came in, she was tired of doing illegal activity. She wanted to do something that was legal. She was in her, I want to say she was in her 30s, if I remember right. She was actively using meth. In the first couple of sessions, she kind of hummed, sort of sitting in the seat and sort of kind of bouncing around for about 15 minutes and then darted out the door and said, I'm done. And I was chasing her down the hall to schedule another appointment. And as time went by, she ceased using meth. She ended up getting into an NA group. We talked about, what do you want to do? And she said, I don't know. I have no idea. So we did a very short, it was like a 20-minute interest survey where she went through and answered a bunch of, well, in my mind, kind of odd questions. Things like, would you like to map the floor of the ocean? Yes or no? Would you like to sing in a choir? Yes or no? Would you like to lay bricks? Would you like to do welding? Would you like to? And what came out of that was, at the end, it suggested that she was maybe interested in being a welder. And she said, yep, I am. And I'm thinking, no way, no how. Just looking at her, and she had lots of makeup and nice clothes and this and that, and thinking that doesn't make sense. She knew herself, she knew her skills, she knew her resources. I did not. Helped her get into college, helped her succeed there with accommodations, helped her get a certificate, and at the end of things, she got a job using a cutting torch in a scrapyard, wearing leather chaps, steel-toed boots, all the protections that you wear when you weld, including the big old helmet. And she was very successful. And it used her skills and strengths. It used her ability to be a problem solver, to recognize what needed fixing, to be able to deal with some kind of rough and tough talking guys that she worked around, and it didn't faze her in the least. So definitely use her strengths and skills based on what she knew about herself and what I didn't, but what I learned over time. So in a service plan, we wrote objectives related to we'll go to college, we'll graduate college kinds of things with assistance to do accommodations and such and such. She had to sit in the back of the class because she couldn't tolerate people behind her. She had to work in a welding carousel that, because it had the back open, people could mill around behind her, but her teacher let her leave 15 minutes early. And so a couple of our objectives related to what kinds of accommodations would help her succeed, and those were the things that we put in. So it wasn't just a matter of go to college, it was a matter of how's she going to succeed in this class. Those are some of the kinds of things that showed up in the service plan. Identified staff type and staff type. Her college professor turned out to be one of her best advocates. They got to chatting and found out that each of them had been cancer survivors. And from that point on, the two of them just got along famously. I think he kind of went over and above to help her succeed, and he truly did. And he showed up in the service plan. We actually sat down and talked at one point in time in his office about things to include in the service plan. And it addressed frequency and duration of interventions. Hers was a scenario in which, once she started being successful in college and she had the accommodations in place, I closed her for a while until college. And then she ended up starting to work with me again when it was time to look for a job. So addressed frequency, duration, length, time, that whole thing in the objectives and the interventions. So if you're going to do successful Medicaid documentation and you're following the golden thread, and you have that wonderful assessment, which leads you to a service plan with smart goals, measurable objectives. Somehow or another, you've got to document what it is that you're doing on a session-by-session basis. And that's the progress note. I've seen people call them activity records, intervention notes, case notes, progress notes, whatever it is you call them. It's the documentation of the session-by-session activity that you had with the person that you're providing services to. They've got to reflect nature, frequency, intensity of prescribed treatment. And by prescribed, we're only saying prescribed from the standpoint of it's written down, and this is what we've said we're going to do. Progress notes back up specific claims and justify payment. Those of you that have provided Medicaid services, you know that sometimes you'll end up getting denied a payment because the progress note isn't accurate. The progress note doesn't say enough or doesn't specify what went on. The same thing will happen with FCS services. And so it pays you literally to become good at being specific about what you've done and providing enough information about what you've done. So it provides evidence of the covered service delivered, the individual's active participation, progress towards the goals and objectives. I think one of the things that I did early on was I would tell a story, but my story didn't really go anywhere, very honestly. And I learned to look back at the service plan prior to my session with the person to see what it was I was supposed to be working on. And then I would make sure that I worked on whatever it was and then noted, if Don develops a resume. If we worked on the resume but didn't get it done in the session, that's what I'd say. Completed a portion of the resume, didn't have enough of the dates. Don will talk with prior employers to get the actual dates and complete the resume at next session. It would be things along that line. And it probably would also say something like Don has, because of memory issues, could not remember the dates, so was going to have to talk to employers in order to get the dates of employment to be able to include in the resume. It's going to be an ongoing analysis of the treatment strategy and whether you need an adjustment to it. and it's going to prove the continued need for services, that medical necessity. If you're working with a person and if they're achieving their goal and they really don't need you anymore, do they need to continue in services? No. If they are needing to continue to work with you because they have not achieved what they needed to and they have to have support, document the need for support. That's what's going to allow you to authorize additional time with AmeriGroup. That's what's going to allow you, in some cases, to ask for that exception with AmeriGroup. There has to be a proven need for the person to continue in services for you to be able to ask for more time. Karen, how are we doing? Are there any questions?
No, it's still all clear. The last one was from Angie Berland.
Okay. So progress notes continued, must be written for each encounter. And any progress note that you're writing will have some kind of billing component. So it's going to have coding for what service did you provide. You're going to have time on it, length of time, you know, from and to. You're going to have who did it, where it happened. Was it in the community? Was it at a school? Was it at work? Was it at their home? Where was it? It's going to have those kinds of things in the billing section. And then it's going to actually have the written note, the narrative that indicates what happened during the encounter. How much progress did the person make towards the goal? All of those kinds of things. It must document the intervention via the services ordered by the treatment plan. So if you're doing pre-employment services and you're working on, maybe the person doesn't know what they want to do and they're trying to decide by making a list of 5 potential employers of interest to them. You know, that intervention is helping them to do the research. Perhaps they don't have the skills to know where to look to find that information, and you're helping them out. Perhaps they have a disorganized thought process and it's hard for them to maintain the focus to be able to do the research, and you're helping them to organize that. But there are a lot of different ways that it can be written. Services not tied to the treatment plan need to be clearly identified. A rule of 3. What we were also taught about Medicaid documentation is real life happens, and occasionally there are real life emergencies that you need to help the person to deal with. But if it's for, it should not be the norm. It should be the exception rather than the norm. If you spend a session dealing with the fact that their car just broke down and you help them to locate a shop and the funding to be able to get their car repaired so they continue to do work search or continue to go to work, that might be fine, and it might in fact be billable. But if it happens in more than 3 sessions, and we were doing, Darren and I, once upon a time did a fidelity review where we were seeing that there was documentation about some things that went on, I think, for 4 or 5 sessions. At that point in time, it was definitely not billable and should probably have been turned over to somebody else to do. And it was also a scenario that it wasn't going to be considered viable under the service plan anymore, because it was a problem that just kept going on and on and on and on with no resolution. And then if different services are needed, the plan must be revised. So that's kind of part of the rule of 3 too. You may run into an emergent situation that you help the person deal with once or twice or 3 times if it's a huge problem. But if you're continuing to look at it, you better revise the plan and you better get it in the plan. Hopefully that makes sense too. So this is an example of a progress note that I stole from Joe Maroney. And in fact, some of the slides that I'm showing you today are thanks to Joe. Some of them are thanks to Rutgers University. Some of them are thanks to Don Miller. It's kind of a conglomeration of various different things. But I like Joe's example, concrete example of a progress note. So took Joe to a job interview is not billable. As opposed to staff worked with Joe on concentration issues identified as a persistent problem in Joe's life and not responding to the voices in public. Staff helped Joe sequence his thinking in order to answer the interview questions effectively would be billable. And he was one, when he did a training on documentation, talked about some of the audit findings. And this one I thought made perfect sense to include. One continual audit finding was staff did not provide any interventions beyond what would be expected in any working environment. This is where I get, if Uncle Bob could help you, why wouldn't Uncle Bob do it? So if Uncle Bob can't help you because the scenario a person's got is more convoluted than what he could handle, you better elaborate on why it is that you're helping as opposed to Uncle Bob. So progress notes, and this is part of Joe's documentation as well, should include the who, what, where, when, why, how. Who being the description of the current status of the person, who provided the services, who wrote the note. What being what service was provided, linked to the plan, what was the purpose of the activity. Why were the services provided? And it better link back to client choice. The person needs to have been the one that said, I want to do this and here's why I need the help. Why did the person participate? The person's progress is identified under the why. How are the services provided? It should monitor the interventions and it should offer next steps. What I would do with individuals, and I think what a lot of my colleagues did, is we'd get to the end of a session and we'd discuss, you know, we did thus and such today, and, you know, here's what I think I heard you say you want to do next time, and it would be a continuation of the plan that we're working on. And so I would check with them related to, here's what we did, here's what I think we're doing next time. Does that match what you think we're doing next time? And they would say yes or no. And it was a great opportunity for me to clarify and for them to correct me if I was wrong. So I would always ask about next steps. What are we going to do next time? And I would put it in the note as my plan. You know, completed a portion of the resume this time. We need the dates. Due to Dawn's poor memory, she had difficulties remembering them. So the plan next time is she will have researched and provide dates. If she's not able to do that, she will come in and let staff know, and staff will assist her to contact employers with her release in order to obtain dates. Just things along that line. The where services are located is incredibly important. Within IPS, one of the things that's measured is percent of time in the community. And when you document your notes, that may in fact be one of the ways that you determine where the services have been provided if you're a supervisor, how much of it was out in the community. You know, what we as IPS fidelity reviewers always hope to see is a calendar that will give that information, but it could also be in progress notes, and it has to some degree from the Medicaid standpoint. And then when, the date and the amount of time spent. And that's it. That's what I got. I am going to provide you with a copy of my slides so that you have them to refer back to. I'm going to provide you with links to the documentation, the Medicaid documentation guidance, and other information. And I would always encourage people to do a little additional research on things like person-centered planning. If it's of interest to you to learn more, there's lots of information out there that will help you to learn more and to perfect the skill of person-centered planning. Questions? Too much, too little, need more help? That's one of the other things that I would let you know is that this has been kind of a high-level overview, probably even for folks that, or particularly for folks that are not familiar with Medicaid billing. Darren and I suspect to some degree Lisa, are available to do training on specific topics at your agency when you determine that there's more information needed. So just keep us in mind. Let's take a break. Lisa, are you on?
Yeah,
5-minute break?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so everybody take a 5-minute break. Be back here at 4:05, please. Thank you for listening. All right, so
I already did it.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Where are we at?
All righty.
Show my screen. Can you see my screen? Tell me in about, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. I can see
Yeah.
that your desktop is absolutely full of stuff.
Oh, wrong darn thing. How about that?
There we go.
Fidelity
Okay.
scale.
Okay.
Oh.
Yep.
It's hard to be the last one. Whose idea was that?
It is. I think I remember it being yours. I could be wrong on that one.
Yes, maybe. What was I thinking? That's a country western
Aaron-
song, you know.
Aaron's got an interesting question. Aaron said, do you think the IPS model would be changing to reflect changes to the remote digital age? That's an interesting question. And my editorial comment is not anytime soon, which would be my answer to that one. I have to wonder though, and Aaron says, example, my Friday boots on the ground, 2 nursing homes that would not allow us in, one which would not accept any paper items, cards, or resume, and a hotel where the owner tried to hire a client for a gas station he works in the evening. He then said housekeeper positions were just for women. Okay. Gotta love that, don't you? 3 strikes. You betcha. Absolutely. Oh, for heaven's sakes. Yeah, I have been impressed with the fact that the IPS folks have written a couple of documents shortly after COVID started in regards to kind of their standpoint related to COVID, which in this case we know is related to a lot of virtual kinds of things. Their system is so huge and their system is so embedded in 6 or 7 countries and 26 states, and we got the data here recently related to I think it was 13,000 people served. That when they do change, it's going to be huge, and I suspect they will at some point in time. But it's got to be a change that's then related to 6 countries and 26 states and hundreds of providers and tens of thousands of individuals served. Rachel said, hello, when you say that a good deal of the wear should be out in the community, how do I manage that during COVID-19? Any tips would be appreciated. Rachel, if you would, send me an email and I'm going to send you PowerPoints from our job developers community of practice related to job development. And in fact, I could send it out to the whole group, but I'll send you the PowerPoints from the job developers community of practice related to how we're dealing with those kinds of things during COVID-19.
And also,
Aaron said,
I think it's good to include that there's a difference from IPS is the model that we implemented under foundational community supports versus what is foundational community supports or America Group doing, or what are we doing at the state to adapt to COVID. That's 2 entirely different questions. To change something in a fidelity, like the fidelity scale I'm going to cover, you would actually have to research that to be able to add it to a fidelity scale, how effective that would be and so forth. So
would be absolutely huge. Aaron says, I know that in my notes I will state if the client chooses telephonic or Zoom over face-to-face, and that's a good thing to include. And obviously Medicaid has been adaptable, at least temporarily, because they didn't allow telephonic or Zoom over face-to-face for a lot of the Medicaid services prior to COVID-19. They are at least temporarily at this point in time, which is pretty amazing, very honestly. Said also many employers often redirect to the website for applying will often state to call back once the application is in. Yep, that's a common practice. And Aaron says DVR just extended bonus through October. Not sure what that is. Yeah, it looks like we're at 4:06, so I'm going to shut up now.
No, you're so good. Okay, guys, so I get the last lap. Everybody loves to be the last one presenting because that means that I'm going to have to keep y'all awake. So I apologize in advance because I'm going to flip-flop from two different documents. One, you should be able to see right now the fidelity scale, but I'm also going to call this your recipe. So if the closer you follow this recipe, according to the research, the better the outcome will be, the better the outcomes will be. And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for outcomes. So I wanted to go ahead and just show you a couple items, and then we'll move from there. So when I'm talking about a recipe, we're talking, it's actually going to break down little tiny pieces of what you should be looking for when you're building your program. So an easy example would be caseload side. Employment specialists have individual employment caseload. The maximum caseload for any full-time employment specialist is 20 or fewer. That's what high fidelity would state. So in a review, you could score yourself 5 because you have a caseload of 20 or less. Now, some people are going to have 21 to 25. That means they would carry a 4, which means that in this case, this might be, let me see, in a recipe, this might be a Nestle chocolate chip cookies, and this is the generic one, okay? But the purpose is you're still going to have cookies no matter which way you do it. So when you're looking at fidelity scale, you can kind of look down from 1 to 5, and in this case, a 5 is the highest you can score. So as you're building your program, you look at serving 20 or less. Some agencies might look at 21 to 25 based on what they decided as an agency. Employment service staff, employment specialists provide only employment services. So it's very descriptive about that as well. So in this case, if we were looking at a number 1, employment specialists provide, sorry, I just lost my sheet. Stop that. Where did it go? Huh, it disappeared. Sorry, guys. Employment specialist provides employment services less than 60% of the time. So basically what that is, there's a lot of programs out there. I mean, we have where individuals might wear a lot of hats. So in a case where you might have an employment specialist that's also a housing specialist that also helps the case manager with delivering medications and so on and so forth. So in that case, they would be spreading their self extremely thin. They generally, in cases when somebody's doing housing and employment, housing always seems to be the most important thing on the list because, well, if individuals are homeless, you're going to spend a lot of your energy trying to get them housed. And employment tends to get pushed off to the back. You know, first you need housing and then you get employment. So the research shows if you have staff that are primarily focused on employment services, you're going to get better outcomes, and well, these services are going to get better attention. It's a specialty, just like a therapist being a therapist is a specialty, or being a phlebotomist is a specialty. An employment specialist has a very distinct, very unique skill set that they also carry that needs to be concentrated on. So if you were going to score a 5 in this case, the employment specialists provide employment services 96 or more % of the time. So I just wanted you to see how scriptive it is. Vocational generalist. Each employment specialist carries out all phases of employment. So it was pretty common in supportive employment services prior to actually IPS or the specific IPS services. Like Dawn, I've been in this field for a long time, and starting out quite a few years ago, it was with serving individuals that had developmental disabilities. I don't job develop. That's not my strength. I don't do that. There's absolutely no back. There's also other issues that come with that. So basically, the supervisor would do the intake and write down information about the person, and then they'd hand it to the job developer. Then the job developer would work with them for a while and get to know them, and have all that windshield time after really discovering and researching what kind of what their goals or what kind of employment that they want. And then they get the job, and then they hand it off to the job coach. Well, the job coach hadn't developed that relationship with the individual that they were serving. Then the job developer did, as they were spending time with them, creating goals, but also doing that job development on their behalf. And so there was, I think, most of us would hear how that might be difficult for that individual to then go to somebody else for job coaching. So as far as the research shows, the employment specialist carries out all 6 phases of employment services. That includes the program intake, the engagement, the assessment, the job development, if job coaching is important, or excuse me, if job coaching is needed, and then follow along support. That's another thing, is that the support that you're providing for them on the job, you really have to have an established relationship, because it's not uncommon that first couple weeks when you're working with somebody that there could be bumps in the road. And if they don't really feel like you haven't built that trust with them, they could just disappear because of their anxiety was so bad, or they were embarrassed by it, and they might, like I said, disappear. But if you really had a relationship with them and they knew that there wasn't judgment with that relationship, there's a good chance they're going to reach out to you and say, "Hey, Lisa, I'm really struggling here." And if you're checking on them with your follow-up support, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to engage and help that person through their challenges. So, I'm sorry, I'm having problems. So I just want to give you a little tidbit on the fidelity scale. This was one of the forms that we shared on Pathways to Employment, and for you to look through. I want to change it up a little bit and talk about the process of quality improvement. So if you're following the recipe based on IPS direction, is that 6 months after you start your employment program, you should have a review. You should have your baseline review. Well, in a perfect world, we'd be able to provide baseline reviews to everybody that's providing IPS services under these foundational community support Medicaid services. Unfortunately, we're able to do some fidelity reviews, but unfortunately, we're not able to do this for every single agency in Washington State. So one of the suggestions that I would have is there is an upcoming fidelity training that DBHR is hosting September 22nd at 10 a.m. We also have, throughout the year, we'll have other fidelity trainings, would it kind of help you see fidelity from a different lens, like you were the reviewer yourself and you were going to go to agency and what you would look for. It really helps to see things a little bit differently. When you start feeling more comfortable and you can kind of go through this fidelity scale, I would suggest that you start looking at the items and say, what am I doing now? What could I be doing at, even a little bit differently? Maybe you're not aiming for a 5 right away, but you're aiming for a 3 to get started, but kind of see where your baseline is, where you are now. Has there been any questions, Dawn?
Martin had a question.
Okay.
So Martin says, after you're done, you said if we carry more than 20 on our caseload, we score low. Are you talking about 20 active participants because our agency would like us to carry 25 to 30 participants per staff?
Okay, that's a very good question. So it means active participants and inactive participants. And one of the things that we're going to cover right now, that we'll cover a little bit farther down, would be that fidelity item about engagement and you as an agency deciding what process an employment specialist would need to go through before they close somebody, to make sure they make all those steps. But there's another kind of twist there. AmeriGroup has asked agencies to kind of put people that aren't engaged on the back burner and letting them age off after that 6-month period of time. And so there might be some inactive people on your caseload. As a fidelity reviewer, I'll leave that to Dawn and Darren because they're doing the fidelity reviews right now, is if they count the people that haven't been active. But again,
I know what Darren and I have been doing. If they're just those folks that AmeriGroup is having you leave open because they're aging off, we haven't counted those because that's not the agency's choice, that's AmeriGroup's choice. So, but if somebody,
I think that's what we agreed upon, right? Is that we would do that in that case.
Yeah. If it's not the agency's fault, then they shouldn't have it counted against them. Is what we figured, I think.
But some agencies will choose to go with the 4. I would really highly suggest not going higher than 25 active clients. And when you're starting a brand new program, you wouldn't want to take more than 5 people at a time. You wouldn't want to start with 5 people that are an active job search, because that's going to put a strain on the quality of the services that you're going to bid or the attention you're going to provide that agency, the individuals, the job seeker that you're working with. But over time, you add 5, a couple get a job, right? Or a couple get into some kind of training program, and then you're adding to that and then building your caseload. That would be my suggestion. There's also opportunities for fidelity reviews each year. So it's actually incentivized, and I think we've said that over time, but where we incentivize agencies to receive a fidelity review, meaning that there's a contract and there's a payment attached to it. Again, it's limited, but each year it is offered. You also can be a fidelity reviewer and be incentivized, your agency can. So look for those announcements as they come out next year. And that would be a great opportunity for you to really get to know this this recipe. I'm going to go back now to page 7. I hope nobody gets seasick.
While you're doing that, Lisa, Catherine had asked, who is appropriate to attend fidelity training and how do they get registered?
Oh, great question. So I would assume, Dawn, that each person that is on this webinar would also receive the announcement. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We put the people who are staff in the different SUD SE agencies on our distribution list, and then all of the different trainings that go out come out in the form of kind of a newsletter, and you sign up for those you're interested in, including the fidelity reviewer trainings.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to point out on page 7, it has executive team support for supportive employment. And one of the bullets that you'll see here is executive director and clinical director demonstrate knowledge regarding the principles of evidence-based practice. But bullet 2, I wanted to highlight agency QA process includes an explicit review of the supportive employment program or components of the program, so at least every 6 months through the use of support employment fidelity scale or until achieved high fidelity, and at least yearly thereafter. So it does take your agency as a whole. So there's a QA process for Medicaid noting for all ever behavioral health services within the community. So with all the services that they're providing. So how can you get your QA process to also add this in? This is behavior. What kind of stumbled on that is because this is really behavioral health, right? This is really a mental health agency, this language. So if you can kind of broaden this a little bit and say how your executive leadership looks at reviewing elements of fidelity throughout, until you reach good fidelity, which is after 100, and then a year thereafter, that would support the mission of the employment program. That would include for the agency to look at the quarterly rate of competitive employment. So this is for all individuals that are being served at the organization. So it's not everybody that's in the employment program for this specific measure. This is actually for the whole agency, the agency as a whole. So an example that they give here is that the supervisor might pass out a caseload list to case managers once each quarter and ask them to indicate which people had been competitively employed at least one day during the quarter. And then the agency leader who would determine then the percentage of people had been competitive employment during the quarter and would share that information with that practitioner. So if you can get a baseline as your agency as a whole, how many people are currently employed, share that information, document that information, and then come back, quarterly, come back 6 months later, do the same thing again and see if the rates of employment are increasing. It's just a way of measuring if the services that you're providing are influencing employment outcomes. So get a baseline. And another action item that you might think about doing is if you're a behavioral health agency, or even if you're a recovery cafe, there's a process that they go through. There might be some information that they fill out when they come to come for services or come to participate as a member. And at that time, can you include employment into that intake process as a whole, as an agency, not the intake to your employment program, to get a broader view of how many people are employed or not, or at least has been employed. And then inquire if your agency has ability to pull. So inquire if your agency has ability to pull employment data. They might already be doing that in some form, or they might be able to do that electronically. And then as one of the things Dawn was talking about with Medicaid or medical documentation is adding employment status to treatment plans. So if you are in a behavioral health agency, or if you provide broad services, And can you influence that within your organization to add employment to the overall outcomes or to their treatment? And then having that process where you're going back into the treatment plan and updating as a whole. Now, it's important your employment programs are tracking all this or documenting this or working with each individual, but the recipe shows that the more integrated your program is into your overall services, the broad range of services that you're providing, the better that your outcomes are going to be. You're definitely going to have more referrals that way. You're going to have more communication with your with other programs, and you're going to have that kind of the wraparound shared communication that you need to help each individual. Then it actually breaks it down to quarterly competitive employment outcomes for people served in the IPS supported employment program. And this is where the supervisor comes in, is how are you going to be able to track competitive employment and the outcomes within your employment program. So you're going to want to identify ways of doing that. One of the ways that you can do that would be the job log. So we talked a little bit, again, we shared the document. I actually pulled this, from the BEST program. This was a program that we had for supportive employment here in Washington State a couple of years ago. And I overseed that program and I was able to borrow it. We have a blank spreadsheet that you can pull from Pathways to Employment, so you don't have to recreate the wheel for how to track this information. But I wanted you to see when the data has actually been entered and how that is useful for your tracking purposes as it relates to fidelity. So in this case, of course, I'm blacking out any names or date of birth or any kind of identity, for confidentiality purposes. So the spreadsheet shows first contact date, so that's the first time they contact them, vocational assessment completed, or career profile completed, and then job development start date. So I just want to stop here for a second. So one of the things that we talked about in fidelity was the goal on average, you would start job development within 30 days of first contact. So you would come back to this date and you'd say, okay, they met with Joe on 9/28/17. This really doesn't look good. Then over here, because this is real data, they come over here, they did a vocational assessment. They didn't complete it till 2/26/18. Well, who knows? The person, couldn't contact them for a while. They got sick. There were some medical problems. I don't know from sitting here right now. But the vocational assessment was done in 2/26, but the job development started on 3/6. So if you really look at this, it sounds like they first met with them, didn't see him, or there were some problems, but when they actually engaged, which I would say would be close to this 2/26, job development happened pretty quickly after that. That's what I see right here. So first contact in this case was 5/24. Vocational assessment was complete by 6/20. I don't see anything wrong with that. I think sometimes it takes a while to really complete the vocational assessment. And honestly, because you're doing updates to it, is it ever really complete? But in this case, they feel like they've had enough information on there. That was done on 6/20, and job development started on 7/23. So in this case, job development, 60 days, roughly. In this case, first contact 4/30, job development started on 6/8, 1/25/220, In this case, it actually, they made the 30 days, 10/11, 11/1. They made it before the 30 days. 2/22/3/1, they made it before the 30 days. So it's on average, 7/18, 7/25. So you guys get the point. Is that you're able to easily, as a supervisor and as a program, when you met with them, and then when you actually started the vocational assessment, but also when your job development start actually happened. And so why is that so important? The research shows if you engage people, and I would just say rapidly engage them and then keep them engaged through the process, you're more likely to keep them for a longer period of time because they feel like they're making some kind of progress. People spend a lot of time planning to do something, and it's just frustrating to everybody. And so keeping them engaged is going to be really important, and that's you know, as the research shows. So as a supervisor, you're going to want to have this. Another important part that I want to show you here as far as where your tracking tool comes about is you look for diversity of employer and diversity of job title. Now, why is that? One of the things that you as a supervisor or you as a program need to look at is that you're really individualizing job development, job search for each individual, and that you're not limiting based on maybe your limits. There are so many jobs out there that I knew nothing about until I was approached by somebody's goal. Or when I started researching how many jobs in a specific area were out there and found out how surprised I was how many different kind of jobs there were in that area. Or when we started really thinking outside of the box, you know, how creative we were to really try to meet somebody's interests and needs. So we want to know that people are diversifying their job development and their job placement, because the research shows, going back to the recipe, is that if you listen and engage that person in a way where you can hear and maybe even pull out some information from them, that they're going to be more apt, more committed to the job that they get. So diversity. In this case, if we were looking at this, we'll go to employer. It doesn't, if anything after 2 starts counting. And again, this is not, the world doesn't come to an end if 2 people work at Walmart. I'm not saying that. It's just that we don't want everybody at Walmart. In this case, it looks pretty diversified. Touch work, core values, roadside service, lifeline connection, Costa Rica, Salvation Army, Burgerville, elite funding raising. So I don't see any duplication there. Now we look at job title. Well, apprentice floor installers, unarmed security officer, project manager, bell ringer, skills coach, telemarketer. So as you can see, there's some pretty diverse job development going on there. So that's going to be, so that's a good sign for the employment program. Does anybody have any questions?
No new ones that I can see as yet.
So there's also rate of pay in there. It's not part of the fidelity items, but it might be something that you could share with your agency as far as average wages. I don't know how much data nerd you guys might be, but this could be something that you could play with. Benefits, good information again. There's also going to be cases when people are going to get second jobs. So they got a new job. This person had an actual job in December. They got a new job in May. They went from apprentice floor installer to painting, general labor. Who knows? I don't know what happened in that case. But the good thing is I can see is if one job ends, then the employment program still work with them to get another job. Or maybe this was a better job the second. They got paid $1 more an hour. So, so that's going to be important information for you to monitor. Okay. I know I went off the grid off my presentation that I was going to do, but I think this is important right here, so I'm just going to go with the flow. Okay, let me see here. Another great item on here is the job log. Let me get there though, please. Okay, job logs. So one of the things that was brought up about was the 65% time in your community. So it would be great if you look at your Outlook calendar or your case notes, however your system's set up, is when you're out there in the community talking to employers on behalf of an individual or but out in the community providing services, however that looks, is that your calendar shows it's in or out. 65% of your time in the community with COVID, I'm sure is going to be a challenge right now, but it is going to be important to monitor that, to look for ways to engage people in the community, and well, COVID's not always going to be here. So the job log included the employers they were contacting, in this case, the addresses and phone numbers, because this is also a tool for your employment specialist. So this should be actually shared and should be in your shared drive, that if you have more than one employment specialist and a supervisor can add information to this. So in this case, there was 2 employment specialists, I believe, on this one. I want to go to this one. I think there's 2 here. There's 2 different initials here. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, we had quite a few different employment specialists at that time. So this is who they contacted, the basic information, but also the outcomes. So what happened after that contact? Was it with the hiring manager? Was it face-to-face? And what's the follow-up? And then maybe when are they going to revisit them? Do they have a follow-up appointment? When you go out in the community and you approach people, you're not always going to have your meeting with them right then. You're actually, in your systematic job development approach, are trying to get that sit-down appointment with them. So when is that sit-down appointment? And it will also help you if you have more than one employment specialist, so you can see each other's work, and that you guys are not both going to the same employer and duplicating the work. Is there any questions yet?
Excuse me, no, there. I do such a great job of talking on mute. Sorry.
Here. Okay, so I went into detail with that. So in our first training, or actually our second training, and we went over career profile, and then Darren just took a deep dive into that. Remember our job search plan, that was one of the 3 main documents that you want to have in your file, and then your job follow-up plan. Now the vocational unit meeting. So the information that I was just referring to in that spreadsheet, that would be a great tool to pull up during your vocational unit meeting. So I don't know how many of you have dived into the fidelity scale, but let's go ahead and review what a fidelity unit meeting is according to this. Just a second, page 15. Okay, come on. Did anybody get seasick yet? I'm gonna get seasick. I'll find it. I thought I wrote it down right. Really? Oh my goodness.
I think it's a test and we're all passing. How about that? Not seasick yet.
Yeah, okay, wow, you guys. So I wrote them down thinking so I wouldn't do that specifically. I didn't want to do that. Okay, so I think it's important that one of the things that we send out to the group is a link to watch a vocational unit meeting. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that on webinar, but we could definitely provide you the link to, to watch what a vocational unit meeting is. But according to Fidelity, at least 2 full-time employment specialists and a team leader comprise the employment unit. So you need at least 2 employment specialists and a supervisor. You meet weekly to discuss job seekers' progress and identify any strategies or job leads, any kind of coverage for each other. So it would be during that unit meeting, if you can pull up that spreadsheet and say, as a supervisor, it looks like, Jill, it looks like you've made 5 contacts last week. And here's the agencies, what was the outcomes of that? And then if there's any kind of, questions that came out, or if there's anything that came out that maybe came up that Jill wanted to, get some feedback from, that would be a good environment to kind of get that feedback. It might be a case at a vocational unit meeting that you've come with a handful of people that you want to staff because you need your supervisor and your coworkers' feedback for that individual that you're seeking employment for. So it serves dual purposes, but it should happen weekly. And if we look at 5, at least 2 full-time employment specialists and a team leader form an employment unit with weekly client-based group supervision based on the supportive employment model in which strategies are identified and job leads are shared. They provide coverage for each other's caseload when needed. So you can see another Fidelity item that I think that would be a good addition to that is role of the employment supervisor. I'm going to start here at the bottom here. Supervisor reviews current client outcomes with employment specialist and sets goals to improve program performance at least quarterly. So I think it's important that you, as a supervisor, as a team, that you have goals. You set your goals. You don't set them too high, but you set out to increase good fidelity and employment outcomes. The more you concentrate on fidelity, the outcomes are going to follow. You could concentrate on, we need at least 5 job starts for the month of October. And you might get some people jobs. But the research shows the more you concentrate on the fidelity and all the recipe of all these little pieces that I'm covering right now, the employment outcomes are going to come. An example would be 65% of your time in the community. The more time you spend in the community, the more likely there's going to be, more likely that you're going to make employer contacts. 6 contacts per week per employment specialist. Actually, it states 6 face-to-face contacts per employment specialist. Obviously is going to increase more outcomes, the more contacts that you're making with employers. So the outcomes are going to follow the closer you follow the recipe. I'm sorry, I'm going off the grid now. I think one thing that we wanted to make sure to cover is the work incentive planning. And now, Darren, did you cover that as far as the documentation, the different forms or ways of documenting that there was work incentive planning?
I did not.
One of the suggested I would suggest you is one, some people have pretty simplified forms that they just have, that they just print out, have people identify what kinds of benefits they might be receiving, and then cover those items and have them sign it. It might be something very simplified, but one of the other things that you could do is you could use the Pathways to Employment Benefit Calculator. And then you could actually print that off. So right here, you could actually go through the questions with that individual and then just print this off and stick it in their file. So that would be a suggestion to know that you've actually documented that. But again, some people just do a form, ask some questions, have them sign it. If a person's on SSI or SSDI, it's going to be a lot more detailed than if a person's on receiving food assistance and is receiving Medicaid, for example. How does working affect your Medicaid, and how does working affect your food assistance? Isn't going to go through the same, calculations as some person with SSI and SSDI would. This form is really helpful for SSI and SSDI. But regardless, you can go through here and make sure you ask these questions and print it off, even if a lot of it's no. How about disclosure? So each individual that you're working with is going to have a choice about what is disclosed about them and what is not. So if we read this, the employment specialist provides clients with accurate information and assists with evaluating their choices to make an informed decision regarding what is revealed to the employer about having a disability. So if all of these bullets are included, the higher that score would be. So in this case, employment specialists do not require all clients to disclose their psychiatric disability at the work site in order to receive services. So it's going to be important. We never require somebody to disclose anything to receive services. Each individual needs to hear the pros and cons of when you might disclose and what you might not disclose. I worked with individuals that were in one of the many programs that I worked in. Before I came to Healthcare Authority, I was working with Thurston County and working with their inpatient. They were receiving SUD inpatient services in the jail, and then they would go to phase 2 of their treatment once they got out to work release. And so every single person that I was providing services to in that group had a criminal background. So that's something that you have to discuss about what to disclose, how to disclose. That's a conversation to be had. But also every single person in that group had a substance use disorder. And in some cases, co-occurring. So what do they need to disclose? Why would you ever disclose somebody is in treatment? Does anybody have an answer when you might do that or why you might do that? Anybody? Okay, I tried. Well, in the case of a lot of people that I was serving, they had limitations. They needed accommodations because they were in work release. So in the case of or in drug court, so they had to have every single Friday off, every single Friday. Since that, it's hard to go into an employer and say I can't work Fridays without disclosing something. So that might be a case where you say, where you have to do your disclosure of your current situation. Also, they were in work release and there's no way around it. You might just say, I committed a crime, I'm in work release, so I can only work between these hours. And in the case, you might say, I made some poor mistakes over the last few years. I'm currently incarcerated and I'm in a treatment program. I'm in phase 2. I'm really dedicated to my recovery. I am in drug court. This gives me an opportunity to, and so on and so forth. And I don't know, it doesn't excuse your behavior, but it says that I did something, I took ownership of it, and that's why I'm disclosing, that I'm in treatment. So there's going to be times, it's going to be very individualized. If it makes sense to disclose, sometimes it doesn't make sense to disclose. But you want to document it somewhere. So that conversation could be had early on. It could be put on a vocation, your career assessment, or it could be an actual separate document. And there is a separate document for disclosure on your pathways to employment, which again is here. Disclosure worksheet. Plan for approaching employers, disclosure of disability at the workplace. But there's more to disclosure than just disability. And here's your rapid job search for competitive job. Initial employment assessment and first face-to-face employer contact by the client or the employment specialist about competitive jobs occurs within 30 days, 1 month after program entry. I just wanted you to see that I didn't make it up. Again, here it goes down to a 5. This is if they were within 30 days, within 1 month, and then just so forth. So between 31 and 60 days, between 61 and 150 days. And this is an average too. So if you have, the majority of the people you're working with, you started providing job development within that 30 time frame, and you have two that you didn't, you're actually not going to score a person lower until you see a pattern, right? Because we know actually it's individualized services. If every single person did it within 30 days, I'd be surprised, wouldn't you, Dawn?
I absolutely would.
I'm talking to myself. I'm not talking to myself. I already feel like I'm talking to myself. So it's really looking for patterns in that regards. Not every single person is going to make that. That is your goal. That's what the average should be. Well, we have about 5-6 minutes. I just want people to look at, take your time, look through the fidelity scale. If you have questions, just let us know. We can explain what that means. Again, we do not expect that everyone start services at high fidelity. It takes time to reach high fidelity. It takes time to build a program. But if you can start out with this recipe with some guiding principles, you're going to add to it as you as time goes by. You're going to be happy with the outcome. I also want to make sure everybody knows that this is we have one more training coming up. That's the next one is job development. That is, I believe, next Tuesday, right, guys?
Yeah, it is.
And we're going to do our darndest to make that a great training for you guys. But I'll be really frank with you. It is really difficult to really engage with this kind of material without virtually not being able to see people and then really feel like you can engage with them. But we're doing the best we can do. but you as an agency will need individual attention. You know, you'll contact us, let us know if you have specific things that you want us to cover for each agency. Number one, your agencies are going to be different. There is going to be some similarities and there's going to be some differences. And so maybe you need help with identifying how you can build this around, you know, where your starting point is or the type of organization you are. So give us the opportunity to do that. It won't be a requirement, but it's a resource. I want to thank you guys also for your time and today. And Dawn, do you see any other questions out there?
Sonia had sent her name to be added to the distribution list, and I sent it off to the gal that does that. I sent the other two earlier too. Crystal asks, will we get an email to register for the next training? Yes. If it's okay with you guys, we talked about things we wanted to send to you. Like Lisa had said, you know, a link to the Evoke unit meeting on YouTube and PowerPoints from the job developer calls. I'll send those out, and the link will be in that email too, so please watch for it. Jennifer said she hasn't received the link yet. That's right, and I will send that out. The slides, probably tomorrow. We'll get them out to you tomorrow along with the link for the next training and that kind of thing. Martin said thank you. Catherine said thank you. Rachel wants to be added to the email group, which I will do. And we're up to speed.
Okay, now it sounds like it said something about please send out the fidelity log. So, I mean, we could absolutely do that. Just in case you misplace it after we send it out, just know that you can go to here to provider tools and go into the log and open it and save it.
We had sent out the training notification for the training that we canceled on Friday quite some time in advance, and for some reason did not get, we had 8 people registered. I don't know what happened, very honestly. I think perhaps it's because in the thank you email for the last one that was attended, where I sent out the different things that we promised, the link was in there, and I just maybe think it didn't get noticed. And so that's why I asked, is it okay if we send it out with a thank you, which we will do. We had sent them out kind of as a bunch, quite a lot earlier. And I guess just if you see an email from Lisa Bennett-Perry, from Darren Paschke, or from Don Miller, that's where you're going to see the items that we promised to send out in addition to the links. Sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
No, you're good. Sometimes we just have to make sure we update our list as often as possible. And also, as your program builds, and maybe you haven't hired your employment specialist yet, once you do hire your employment specialist, unless you let us know, we can't add them to the distribution list. So that's one of the things I'm doing with my programs that I manage currently is sending out a spreadsheet asking for them to update me. People come and go and I don't know. And so I have a distribution list. We have a global distribution list. We have distribution all over the place. But if you don't send me it, they won't get that information. Well, thanks everybody. It's 5 o'clock. I'm not going to keep you over. I'm sure you're tired. And I want to wish you a good week. And I guess we will talk again on next Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Hope you're all well and safe from the fire and things.
Thanks all. Stay safe and well.